One of my dogs is barking.
Okay, well, we'll just,
I know, he'll edit it all out, but...
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Magus Brothers. I am Tyler, and with me is always...
Hey, y'all, I'm Fairbrand, and you said latest really weird. So I guess we're just going to start off that way tonight.
Yeah, well, it's been a weird week, man. It's been a weird week.
Uh-oh.
Before I even dive into it, how's your week? How's your week?
My week has been pretty insane, actually.
Dude, same.
Dude, it's been so crazy. It was my father-in-law's birthday, and he had passed a few years ago, and it's always an emotional time for my wife.
Understandable.
Yes, obviously understandable. I have been there for her, supporting her, so it has been very draining. But now I am here to talk about Final Fantasy with my best friend. So we are ending this week super sweet right now.
Hell yeah, little smiley face on the week. I know I needed it. My job has been incredibly stressful as some restructuring things from the higher up that trickle down has really affecting me in a way that it hasn't previously, and it's just been a load of stress because with big companies and restructuring on paper, they're like, oh, this is going to go so smooth, and it never does.
It never does, dude. It never does. I know exactly what you mean. I work for the United States government, and they always have these huge grand schemes of we're going to do this and this way, and it's going to execute perfectly, and then it executes, and they're like, we forgot these 400,000 different things, and it fails.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where it's like I heard them talking about all these plans, and I was just like, this is going to be such a bad time. And guess what? It was. But enough about that. Aside from that, the week's been great, and I've been looking forward to having this time with you. This past weekend, we had some good. You and I actually had an impromptu live stream that was wrought with technical difficulty on my side, but we got it hammered out and watched the...
To put it lightly,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure we couldn't hear you or see you for like the first 30 minutes of a 2-hour stream.
Dude, I don't know, we have pretty decent internet here, and it hardly ever has issues, the occasional little hiccup where we have to restart the modem, and typically we get a solid 150 to 200 megabits per second, which is fine for what we do. But the beginning of that night, I could not get it past 40. It was so bad, and I know it was affecting my quality of how I sounded, me coming through, freezing.
Yeah, basically your camera was frozen, and we couldn't hear anything you said.
Yeah, it was a bummer, but we got to hang out. We had people watching, and we did the second fan fest for Final Fantasy XIV. It was digital because they are taking precautions for the pandemic. Typically, they have those big live events, usually in Vegas and then in Europe and then in Japan to close it out. But, they're doing the right things and not holding physical events.
Hopefully we can go to one day.
2 years from now.
I feel like Vegas it's a little closer to me, but it's almost kind of in between us. Maybe one year we could just meet there for a fan fest.
Yeah, next fan fest, let's meet up in Vegas and hang out, bro down, hug Yoshi-P.
Yes.
Because
let's go tell him.
I said it on the stream, list of top 10 things for me to do before I die is hug Yoshi-P. And we'll get into why.
That's just all 10.
Yeah, it's all 10.
That's all 10 of them.
How many letters are in hug Yoshi-P? Because I'll just do that whole number 1, H, number 2, U, and just go all the way down. Hug Yoshi-P. But we'll get into
that's
why
a bucket list.
Yeah, that's the whole bucket list. We'll get into why I want to hug this man so much. But before we do, earlier this week, right after the fan fest, and we were like, all right, we got some good. Square Enix decided to give us a little bit of extra good for some good. You could even say.
This was on Tuesday, May 18th. They dropped a brand new article giving us all sorts of juicy information on Final Fantasy VII Remake, Intergrade, Intermission,
whatever. Please listen to episode 2.
Yeah, go listen to that, and you'll know why. Anyways, we got a whole bunch of more information, which was surprising that we even got it, considering they had just dropped the final trailer for this DLC, like a week or so, maybe a little bit longer than that prior to this.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but when I hear final trailer, I think final, like this is it.
Yeah, like, dude, it came out on the 18th, which is less than a month until it releases. I almost feel like I've played the game already with how much information they've given us.
I hope not, because with the DLC only being 2 chapters, I hope there's, I think we mentioned this, but if we didn't, I'm going to power through and do it again. But, in Remake, the chapters can vary in length depending on what's going on. And I hope that, with them doing just 2 chapters, that they're 2 solid, real packed chapters of story, combat, all that. I hope it's not short.
I can't imagine it would be. I'm going with they've showed us some good segments, but I think they're holding the best stuff for us to discover as we play it. I have to have faith. I can't imagine that was like all the good stuff.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I don't think they would do that to us. But Fairbrand, why don't you carry me off into the sunset and tell me about some of this news? Why don't you take me away?
Well, let's see. They actually told us the name of Scarlet's battle armor that we saw in the final trailer. They're calling it the Crimson Mare, which
it's a good name.
Dude, it's super dope. Like, I feel like they really nailed down Scarlet and her personality. They just really brought her into the current generation. And I'm just in love with her as a villain. She's awesome, and she's so good.
Yeah, I feel like they looked at her in OG7 and they were just like, all right, how can we make this fit in modern day, even if it's just meme quality? And they just, instead of like trying to make it even slightly based in reality, they were just like, no, we're going to make her crazy. Not crazy, but we're just going to like lean into how intense she is. And it's just like, cool. We're just going to have a Shinra grunt as her footstool.
Isn't there a scene where she's just like walking across a bunch of them as they're like laid on the ground? Am I misremembering?
I don't know if it's a bunch of them or like maybe just one, but like, again, like even if that didn't happen, she's characterized so well and it's so funny that we can make that memory believable. And it's just great.
I know. And then they obviously tossed in a little fan service in there with her outfit, so she's just full of the good bits.
Yeah, and I am happy because really Scarlet doesn't get a chance to shine until later in the game.
Yeah, I'd have to agree.
Like Heidegger has some moments in the original, but like Scarlet doesn't really shine until later. So like them putting her in here and giving her some extra screen time with this DLC really does kind of like, give us more time with her and characterize her and build her in the narrative. So I think it was a good choice personally.
Speaking of Scarlet, in this new article they released, they actually specifically stated that the materia Yuffie and Sonon are looking for is actually in her possession. Those are Square Enix's words, and it really changes up some theories we have discussed before.
I don't even know that it changes the theories, because I think one of the theories we talked about was in Inter whatever, episode 2. Go back and listen to it.
Do it.
We straight up say that she could be working on huge materia.
Right.
Because we see her working on materia experiments in Remake. And it makes perfect sense if they're going for materia, that she could be creating the huge materia and they could be going after it. And that's one theory we proposed. And if anything, I feel like this news kind of solidifies this theory we have. Not that it's a unique or special theory, but like, I think that's what they're going for. They're going after whatever materia experiment she's got going on.
Oh, 100%. And, I wasn't saying that all of our theories were wrong. I was just saying 2/3 of them are wrong.
Okay, that's fair.
Since we said proto-materia, black/white materia, and then presumably the huge materia that she's working on. And with this very specific wording that they use in this article, I'm just going to have to go with that materia we saw in like the test tube thing in her lab when she had her feet propped up on old dude. It's a lot of assumption, but, I'm going to operate on the assumption that she's trying to create huge materia and Yuffie or Sonon are going after that huge materia.
Agreed. I definitely think that that's what's going on. It sounds like we had some key art or some new artwork done up with high res for Nero.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Is such an interesting character design. It trips me up all the time. But
what's your opinion on the way he looks?
Oh, man, don't do this to me. Some of the characters in Dirge of Cerberus Like, don't get me wrong, Vincent's always looked a little edgy, and maybe it's just 23 years of the game, you know, like I've accepted it. But then when Dirge of Cerberus came around, it was like, okay, it looks like they walked Final Fantasy VII into Hot Topic. And like, I saw a Twitter post by, I think it was Chocobo Pup or something. Please don't go to that Twitter if you are at all concerned about the images you're seeing being safe for work.
Lewd.
Yeah, it is a very lewd Twitter, but this person has great opinions. They talk about how this person was like in a straitjacket and chained up to like a Mako reactor and all of these things. And I was like, okay, like I obviously forgot some Dirge of Cerberus lore there. And if like he was restrained and chained up, like, okay, they went all Hannibal on his outfit. Okay, that makes sense. But I was running around under the assumption that he dressed himself. And I was like, I don't know why he put that mask on himself and why he's dressing so edgy. And this is just a little much.
Maybe he's a vampire too, and he has that mask on to stop him from biting people.
I don't know. And he's got metal wings shooting guns and stuff. I don't know.
Dude, they totally embraced the super... I hate saying like the anime thing, but they really embraced their Japanese culture in designing these. And you also have to remember that the Japanese band GACT is the ones who performed music for that game. And if you ever looked up images of what GACT looks like.
Look, they may have provided music, but they weren't in there designing the characters. And all I'm saying is the Dirge of Cerberus lore is fantastic. I'm just saying some of the character designs are a little out there for me, but I don't want to go off on that tangent because ultimately it's Final Fantasy VII. It's great and I love the lore. Just some of the characters are a little designed weird. But what I'm taking away from the final trailer we got and Nero is that it seems like Weiss is this battle sim fight that's meant to be like a super hard boss. Like that's what I'm kind of taking away from it. But it sounds like within the actual story of Yuffie and Sonnen and what's going on with Inter whatever, that Nero is going to be a bad guy, maybe even the main bad guy if Scarlet isn't.
Right.
And we got to see him using his crazy shadow powers. So it definitely sounds like regardless, we're getting some Dirge lore pulled into here, making it very apparent that this stuff was actively going on. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, not just within intermission, but, in subsequent parts of the game. You know, are we going to get to see Weiss? Are we going to get to see these other prevalent characters? Are we going to get to see Genesis and Angeal and all of these things from Crisis Core?
Ooh.
You know, there's a lot of theories about Genesis coming out, but...
Are we going to be able to go into a theater and sit down and watch a production of Loveless?
We really ought to. Like, at this point, like, just...
I know. I have no idea what that play is about. I need to watch it.
I don't like. Do they have the play out where you can watch the whole thing, or like?
No, it's like as far as I know, it's literally never existed. It's
there was one game. I don't know what game it was, and I feel like someone
Crisis Core,
obviously Crisis Core. But I'm talking about a totally different game, not Final Fantasy, where like you could sit down and on a TV within the game, if you sat down and watched the TV, it was an entire movie that you could watch in-game on that TV. And I don't remember what movie it was. I don't remember what game it was, but I feel like they need to do that. Like just make Loveless a full-on play and then put it on a TV and remake where you can just sit down and watch all of Loveless.
Huh.
I don't know.
That could be interesting.
Big immersion, wild theory. But moving on.
Yeah, speaking of playing, you will also be able to play this new minigame for Condor. And we got a couple screenshots of that. We didn't really get too much more information on it other than you can use materia in it to, sort of turn the tide of the battle in your favor.
And it sounds like there's an ATB.
Yeah, there's an ATB bar. And you use one ATB bar to deploy a troop, so all your precious gil will be safe, it sounds like. So you're not spending money on these troops anymore, which is great. Worst part about the original, spending all that money. And in one of the screens, it showed Yuffie playing against Kairi, who was in the original 7 remake. Wow, it's weird saying that. Who is in 7 remake as I don't really remember what she did. I just remember her standing on some garbage yelling at people, but it kind of sounds like we're going to be going around the slums playing different people, and a rare materia is going to be won from the Grandmaster.
Ooh, I wonder what it'll be.
I mean, my assumption is Ramuh, since they did show new screens of him and say, obviously he's going to be using Judgment Bolt and Voltaic Lance are his big 2 attacks. So I would assume it's Ramu, but I also hope it's not Ramu since they already showed us Ramu. I'm hoping it's some other materia.
As a surprise, leaving us something
like
to
a
look
surprise.
forward to.
Like, I don't want to be like, oh, sweet, it's Ramu. I've already seen it. Let me get something new.
And we found out that Yuffie's limit break is Bloodbath, which we kind of already knew because even from the early trailer, some eagle-eyed internet sleuths, as there always are, found that pretty quickly. But we also found out that Sonen's limit break is called Dance of the Dragon.
Yes.
And I gotta say, I'm a little jealous because I personally would love to dance with dragons.
Who wouldn't? You sound like you've been playing as a bard in too much Dungeons and Dragons. I want to dance with that dragon. Roll to seduce.
I've never been one for bards, but
surprising.
If playing a bard would get me the ability to dance with a dragon in Dungeons and Dragons,
That's surprising considering you play guitar. Anyways, I just wanted to point this out. It's interesting that they renamed Yuffie's limit break to Bloodbath, since in the original it is called Blood Fest.
I wonder if that was a mistranslation. Japan was like, no, we get to retcon this 20 plus years later.
That's basically what I'm going with, even though I think I kind of like Bloodfest better than Bloodbath. While Bloodbath is totally metal, I like Bloodfest. I'm a purist. Just like the assess materia should have been called sense, but whatever. Anyways, let's continue. Go ahead. You got this.
The last little bit of juicy news. Actually, before we get into the last little bit of juicy news, they apparently, the synergy attacks, we've already known this is going to be a thing for a while, but both characters have to have ATB to use it. And the only thought that I had was like, I hope the synergy attacks are strong because if it's going to cost both characters ATB when I could be using it like their individual ones,
Well, I know and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but the one where like Sonon flings Yuffie off his staff, they actually gave a little bit of the breakdown on the mechanical side to where they said whatever enemies that hits afterwards, they're going to take increased damage. So I'm assuming it's going to do, buku amount of damage, and then now they're vulnerable. So it'll be like, they'll get a defense down debuff or something.
That makes sense. That gives it some layered decision making with the moves you want to use.
Right. It's going to give us that strategy of giving us the illusion that we're controlling more than one character, and to actually give us some way to strategize these battles rather than just spamming square with Yuffie or whatever. So I'm totally for it.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting. The last piece of news, and before I dive into it, it's not news.
News in quotes.
News in quotes. It came from 4chan, which if you don't know what 4chan is, I'm not going to spend this time explaining it. Don't go looking. 4chan is the dark side of the internet. Terrible things on there if you want to save your eyes. But the reason we're talking about it is because 4chan has leaked some actual legitimate things. This may not be one of them. They've leaked far more fake things than they have real things.
Disclaimer, good chance this isn't true, but we're going to report on it.
We're going to report on it because it's exciting. I'm actually going to just straight up read it, but it says, Netflix will soon release some Final Fantasy VII anime. And it says, both of these projects will be directed by Nomura. The anime dedicated to Final Fantasy VII Remake will tell new stories that intertwine with the plot and events of the main game. The first section will be dedicated to the events that it will precedes the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake, while the second section will be dedicated to the events that occur simultaneously within the events of the game, coming to the end and also anticipating something for the future, while the Kingdom Hearts anime will be much shorter, but definitely more complex. Made entirely in CG, according to the description, it will combine multiple events from multiple games. That all has to do with Kingdom Hearts, so it doesn't matter. Really, the takeaway here is...
you missed the last sentence. There's a Final Fantasy XIV TV series, which is supposedly in the final stages of making.
I can't remember if we knew that there was a Final Fantasy XIV anime coming. I remember there being some anime commercials, and maybe they just... I feel like that wasn't a surprise.
Well, there was that Netflix show called Dad of Light or whatever, and it was about a dad and a son. I never watched it.
Oh my God, I love that show.
I hear good things, so go watch it. It's live action. This is real people. It's a Netflix show, but it's about a dad and a son bonding over Final Fantasy XIV.
Point being, I would totally take a Final Fantasy XIV anime. I don't remember if that's real or not. Probably should have done research, but that's not what we do.
Who does research on a podcast? We just wing it, whatever, dude.
But point being, there might be a 14 anime in production, but a 7 remake anime. How do you feel about that?
I want it to be about Genova crash landing on the planet and Cetra dealing with it. That is what I want it to be. I've already thought about this.
Yeah, that would be tight. Yeah.
It's only talked about a couple times. And I think seeing that happen and seeing it all unravel and give us that information and just, dude, that's what I want. Out of everything, because we already have Crisis Core. We already have Before Crisis, and that's all getting remade into the mobile game. So I don't want any of that. And the only thing I can think of prior to that I really want to see would be Genova landing, or the events of Hojo and Lucretia deciding to inject Genova's cells into her unborn child. That would be another cool thing.
So it's interesting hearing you say all this, because I want to pose a question I've seen comments on in Twitter and in the community. Do you personally feel that if this is true, which again, highly suspect, could be total BS, but if it is true, and with the expansions they're doing within Remake, pulling all the continuity together in one game and all of that, do you feel like they're removing the mystery or unexplained events? Not unexplained, but they're showing us too much. For example, these characters are all beloved, the story is getting fleshed out, but do we need to see Sephiroth as a kid? Do we need to have all of the videos or a game or a show or a movie about the Genova events? Do you think they're showing us too much where our head got to fill certain things in and we had that a lot of separation to kind of build our own narrative in our head? Do you think they're showing us too much?
So I don't think we need it, but we want it. And I say that because the limitations to games back in 97, they couldn't show you that much. Everything was told to you through text boxes, and then, they could only animate the field model, so only really do so much. And while I don't think we need all of that information and that backstory, I just know the people want it. And now in the technology of current age video games, they are able to show that kind of stuff. And it's sort of rather than having all of these crazy theories and fans going crazy, what is the definitive answer? Devs, please tell us. They're just going to give it to us. And maybe that, connects back into a question you had posed in a previous episode of, oh my God, I just brain farted.
It'll come to you. Just breathe.
What was I talking about? You had posed a question to me.
But in another episode, I don't remember.
I know. I was on such a good roll.
And then it came screeching to a smash into a wall.
I can't even remember what I was just talking about.
With modern day games and, the differences between 1997 and the limitations they were facing.
Yeah, dude, I completely just lost it all.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on and just keep powering through.
It'll come back to me.
If it does, just
probably
interrupt
me.
It
probably won't.
But Final Fantasy, there's games like Silent Hill, for example, that are, and I love Silent Hill, but they're ambiguous and they tell you just enough, because what you don't know can sometimes be far scarier than what they're showing. And so they intentionally leave gaps in certain things for you to kind of fill in or really work to build the narrative. And they're scary. The unknown is scary. And that's fine. But this isn't Silent Hill. This isn't a horror story. This isn't a game that is meant to be ambiguous. I do think that, one, the original story they wanted to tell with 7 was far bigger than what they could. We are aware of Vincent and Yuffie being optional characters. There were corners cut even within just the localization, changes to the story that got left out, and then it became a huge hit. They expanded on the compilation, which is great, but anytime you expand upon a story way after the fact, it never fits perfectly. There's always going to be these weird outliers or things that if you added this in right now at this point, where was it in the original? There's no connection there. And you do what you can, but now they get to tell that entire story from front to back the way they want to, having all of the elements. And sometimes that means they get to explain things that weren't fully explained or left to our imagination back then. And that's fine. This isn't a game meant to be that ambiguous. They get to tell a much bigger story now, and tight.
Right.
Let them tell that story. It's going to be great.
And now I actually kind of remember where I was going. So, as we have said in a previous episode, we believe that the reason they're going so hard on this is because they want us fans to shut up about Final Fantasy VII. They want to move on from it. So by giving us as much as possible now, giving us a TV show, giving us DLC, giving us more backstory, fleshing out all of the characters as much as possible.
3 Ultimanias per game.
If they make it to where there's no questions left, everybody's just going to shut up. And like we both think, this is Square Enix telling everybody, hey, we heard you. Shut the heck up. We're done with Final Fantasy VII. We are moving on. Here's the whole remake, DLC, freaking mobile games out the wazoo. Even like we're going to pull Advent Children into this. We're going to pull Dirge of Cerberus, Before Crisis, Crisis Core into this mobile game and slowly release it for free. Shut up. Take all this information. You know every detail. Nothing's left. Here's 40 Ultimanias at the end of it. And that's why I said we don't need it. We want it. And Square Enix wants us to want it to shut up.
Joke's on them.
We will never shut up.
But I don't know that they truly want us to shut up. We do joke, you and I, a lot about how we've been screaming collectively for Final Fantasy VII to be remade for such a long time that they're finally like, fine. But really, they're probably behind their desks going, we're so happy to be able to provide this to you and finally do this right. And then in their head, they're just counting money and being like, oh man, we're just printing it. And like, really, this is the right decision. Like, you know, taking a step back from anything funny, anything cynical, whatever, like they're remaking the game. We live in an age now where Square Enix has got like a big, robust store. You know, finding toys for Final Fantasy VII in America back when that game came out was difficult. It was hard to get like cool stuff like that.
Yeah, I found exactly one at a comic book store. I don't remember what it was called, like Art Galaxy or something. I don't remember. Anyways, it was Cloud on the Hardy Daytona with his hard edge, and it was a little keychain, maybe like 4 inches wide, and it was my prized possession. I got it for like $5. It was my prized possession as a child, and I unfortunately no longer have it. But like I used to go to swap meets looking for, you know, like bootleg toys, and I couldn't find it. And now I just Google it. Yo, Square Enix store. Here's $200. Give me a replica of Sephiroth.
Yeah, and we live in a different world, different society. And granted, there were collectors that collected action figures and stuff like that. But nerd culture as a whole, you know, not in a derogatory way, but has become far more
mainstream,
accepted and mainstream, and collecting toys, big collector's editions, that type of thing is a big thing now that didn't exist back then. So Square Enix is like, you know, if we're going to do 7, which no matter how you boil it down or how you feel, what you feel is the best Final Fantasy ever personally, Final Fantasy VII is the Final Fantasy that stands above the rest in a pop culture sense for good reasons. And they're like, if we're going to redo this game, we're going to do it right. We're going to release so much merchandise of different tiers, whether it's keychains or lanyards or books or whatever, like
or your Shinra ID,
or like big statues of different scales and qualities. Like they want every fan to be able to get plushies, like whatever calls to you and whatever you like to collect. They've got something for you, and that's the right decision. Like 7 is the big one for them. It's their flagship.
Yep.
And they got to do it right. And, you know, we can joke about how they're like, shut up after this, but really this was the right call. And I feel like every Final Fantasy moving forward, because it's just Final Fantasy, like Nier, which blew up, but like they've got toys for that in the store. Like this is just the new direction Square Enix is going. But 7, they're going to pump a bunch of stuff out for it. Rightfully so.
Which, as a admitted fanboy, I could not be happier about, because I want it all. Square Enix, take my money. I'm just going to start depositing my paycheck into their account. Just take it.
Speaking of Square Enix taking our money, we are actually going to segue away from 7 and 7 Remake and Enter whatever, and talk about the Final Fantasy that Fairbrand and I have sunk the most hours into out of any other Final Fantasy. And that's
out of any other game.
Yeah, probably any other game, honestly, in our entire life. Yeah, good call.
I think it beats out World of Warcraft at this point.
Yep, agreed. But that's Final Fantasy XIV. They recently, this past weekend, had a fan fest, like we mentioned, where they showcased new information for their newest expansion, Endwalker, coming out in November 2021. I think it's November 23rd with early access starting on the 19th.
Yes, that sounds correct.
I'm pretty...
We'll operate under the assumption that's correct.
I'm like 95% positive on that one. But they showcased a couple of different things. They released the full trailer, which was gorgeous, beautiful.
Oh, it's so good.
And they showcased the new DPS job. I think it's the last job that's getting added with this, not last job ever, but the second and last for this expansion, Reaper.
Yep.
Which
it's Bloodborne.
I believe you called Reaper back when they showed that. Forget what his name is, but what was he? Was he in Shadowbringers? Did we fight him? He's like the monkey guy.
Yeah, he was in 5.0. I don't remember his name either, but he had a scythe and like a dragon tattoo that came to life, and I think it turned into his scythe or something. And you fought him in some city. It was towards the end of the 5.0 story. And as soon as that happened, I was like, I'm putting money down. Reaper's coming in 6.0. And I was right. I should have went and made a bet, an actual bet with real money, and I would have cashed.
Either way, Reaper looks tight. And as somebody who plays Summoner almost exclusively for the entirety of Final Fantasy XIV.
Your life.
Yeah, my life. Reaper looks tight. And depending on what they do with Summoner in 6.0, I might do Reaper because Reaper's got a scythe, which, call me edgy, but scythes are dope. I've always wanted to use a scythe even in like tabletop RPGs. And then they summon like some Dementor-looking shade from the void, and it's a void scent and looks dope. Like, it looks like straight up out of a horror movie. I love it. Like, I don't know. Everything about Reaper is just like, this is tight.
Yeah, they definitely really captured... This is a really easy game to, draw parallels to because it's a popular game. But it's basically Bloodborne, okay? Bloodborne's awesome. The aesthetic is gorgeous in Bloodborne. And that's 100% the vibe I got off Reaper.
I mean, when Yoshi came out on stage dressed like Reaper, which was tight, like it looked like he walked right out of Bloodborne into Final Fantasy XIV.
Reason number 4,642 that Tyler wants to give him a hug.
Dude, he's all right. We're diving into why Yoshi-P is great with a little bit of backstory first. So, Final Fantasy XIV, for those who are unfamiliar with it, Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO. Massive multiplayer online game. It's not like a traditional Final Fantasy game where you just load up and you're the one character just progressing through everything. This is online. You're playing with hundreds of thousands to millions of people from across the world, forming a variety of parties, whether it's 4-man for dungeons or 8-man for trials or 24-man for raids. And you can do PvP against other players. You can just, party up and just go out and kill monsters across the world or quest together.
There's ERP.
Yes,
there's,
there is.
Regular RP.
But it's great. It's an MMO. If you're familiar with World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, there's so many MMOs. I'm not even going to list them all, but it's very similar to that. It's not the first MMO Final Fantasy did. They had 11, which came out for like the PS2. It's still running today.
Yep.
I actually have played like a fair amount of 11. I think I talked you into trying it. I don't remember if you ever tried it before that.
Yeah, I did. I played a Dragoon.
And while 11 was incredibly dated and, World of Warcraft came around and showed everyone what an MMO could do, Final Fantasy 11 is honestly my favorite iteration of the Summoner job. Like, I wish Summoners worked very similar to what they did in 11. But 11 had a lot of, the stories were great, but a lot of, with the graphics and the mechanics and stuff like that.
It's dated. It's hard to get into.
It's dated.
In 2021, it's almost impossible to get into that game now because of how dated it is. Unless you're looking for those old antiquated systems, then it's the perfect game because it still has a pretty active fan base.
Yeah, it does. But, 14 came out and 14 was meant to be like, okay, this is Final Fantasy MMO with modern day sensibilities and stuff like that and like high powered graphics, et cetera, et cetera. And it came out in September 2010 and did awful. Like, just complete...
And then it shut down.
Yeah, complete universal negative reception. Apparently, there was a free trial. They extended it and turned around. And the president at the time was Yoichi Wada. He actually issued a formal apology to players in like December, a couple months after it came out, and said that the game was going to be dramatically overhauled, and the development team, they removed Tanaka from the project and demoted, I'm not familiar with this individual, but they demoted somebody from the director of the game to lead designer, and then completely waived all the monthly fees, and then said that they were not releasing it for the PlayStation 3 anymore, and then brought on our Lord and Savior, Yoshi-P, whose name is Naoki Yoshida, but everyone calls him Yoshi-P. And, you know, he didn't have a massive repertoire. He worked on Dragon Quest X, but they brought him on to right the ship. And boy, did he.
Did he. Oh, my gosh. That man did some good stuff.
But before we dive into what he did, you did some reading, a little bit of light research. Tell me about why the original 1.014 was just so bad.
Okay, so I never played 1.0, so I'm just going off
Neither did I, just for clarification.
Yeah, I'm just going off of other people's reporting. And, like, the really big stuff was that, like, everything was laggy as heck, you know? And the game crashed all the time. It took, like, almost a second just to change one piece of gear, and you would have to change each piece of gear one at a time. So if you had 10 pieces, that's 10 plus seconds of changing gear, which is ridiculous.
I also heard that the graphics were just so over the top for an MMO that was part of why everything was so laggy to load. It was like they tried to do like a straight up full production Final Fantasy, but in an MMO where they're constantly loading people and instances and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's just not practical.
Yeah, people reported that like you had to have the top end of high-end computers to run it. And that was a big issue with everything, why everything was so laggy, why it always crashed with everything. And then like everything was just a massive grind fest, more than your typical MMO is. Because, you know, MMOs, a lot of it is grinding, but this was like grinding squared, you know? Like somebody said it took them a couple hours just to vendor out random monster parts that they collected from just killing monsters. Like hours to just sell stuff that you don't need. It's like ridiculous. Another thing with all of these big, huge graphics, there wasn't even any loading screens, which that sounds awesome. Like who wants to stare at a loading screen all the time? But with a game that large and that powerful, you needed those loading screens. Because if you're standing in a city and it's loading the city across the map, of course everything's going to lag. And like, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And so ultimately, they brought Yoshi-P on, and there's a little YouTube, I don't want to call it a documentary, but there's like a YouTube video out there which talks about like the new development team getting up on stage and like essentially like apologizing to everybody and bowing and saying they were going to correct it. And, you know, in the world of MMOs, one, paid subscription models for MMOs aren't always sustainable or successful. That monthly fee when you have other MMOs like 14 or WoW or anything else, like going, I'm going to pay an additional subscription for this game, like that's a choice. And when an MMO is not doing well, one of the first steps is to go free to play. And typically when an MMO goes free to play, it does not come back. Ever.
It goes free to die.
Yeah, free to die. And the fact that 14 was able to go free to play after how horrible it did, and then come back to have a successful paid subscription model is a testament to, one, the backing Square Enix had, because most MMOs don't get that chance. You know, they just die. But they were able to recover 14. They brought Yoshi-P in, and they did quite a big overhaul. They had to restore the trust in players, and one of the big things they did that still happens to this day is the letters to the producer. They basically started discussing design direction changes. They really emphasized player feedback and wanted to increase transparency during the process.
Which they've been very successful at.
Yeah, even today. Like, that's a huge thing. Like, one of my favorite things about 14 and Yoshi is just how communicative they are with their player base. They have live letters every, what is it, like 3 months when patches come out?
Yeah, roughly.
So it's fantastic. A year after 1.0 released, WATA came out and claimed that the initial launch of 14 had quote unquote greatly damaged the Final Fantasy brand, which is a hefty statement to make.
Yeah, because Final Fantasy was already pretty huge. So to say that it's been damaged, which
by one game.
I mean, I guess depending on the Final Fantasy fan, depends on which game damaged the brand. But
True.
for the man himself, Mr. Enix himself, to come out and say that, that's not to be taken lightly.
Yep, but ultimately, A Realm Reborn, or 2.0, came out and re-released in August of 2013. This was after a massive in-game event in 1.0 where essentially all the players gathered together for like this event across the entire game that ultimately resulted in Bahamut exploding out of the moon Dalamud and nuking the world, and then the game closed, which, don't get me wrong, if you're going to shut down your game, what an epic way to do it.
I know, dude. That's so good. Like, thank you for the RP there, Square.
Especially knowing that the game was coming back, because then they just riffed off that same story. And then like the trailer for Realm Reborn was Bahamut coming out, and they gave us that backstory and then just continued that story and picked it right back up. I mean, not even just the fact that they got to bring this game back, but what a genius way to do it. Like, how cool.
Yeah, that was above and beyond. They could have just clicked shut down and everything go black. But no, they were, so invested in making this better. They gave a good story reason for why this is happening. And add that to the list of reasons we want to hug Yoshi.
Yeah, and so 2.0, or A Realm Reborn, came out August 2013 and was just they were able to reinstate the paid subscriptions to ultimately, probably recover that development cost and then saving the game. But they didn't have to turn those paid subscriptions back off. Player base just grew. A Realm Reborn was fantastic. And, in comparison to the other like expansions and story that came back out, not the best. In comparison, A Realm Reborn isn't bad by any means, in my opinion. There was a lot of... They were chained to 1.0 and that story and having to redo a lot of things and work with what was already established. They were essentially working with the skeleton of what was there, and they didn't really get to branch out in their own direction yet.
Yeah.
And we're not going to cover the story of every single expansion because that would take so long. But June 2015, their first true expansion got to release was Heaven's Ward. And Fairbrand and I will go back and forth about what we prefer. But ultimately, Heaven's Ward and Shadowbringers, which we'll get to, are just phenomenal stories. Like, they are so good. Heaven's Ward is amazing.
And if you're interested in playing, you can play through Heaven's Ward on the free trial up to level 60 for free.
Yes.
There's the pitch.
Yeah, let's just expand on that pitch. Free trial. If you've got a PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, or a PC that can run it, you can get a free trial where you get to play the game entirely free from level 0 to level 60. You get to experience the Realm Reborn story and the Heaven's Ward story for free. If
the entirety of Heaven's Ward.
On the fence about it. It's so good. Heaven's Ward is just super, super great. And, me being a fan of dragons, if it's not been stated enough, it's the 1,000-Year Dragon War. That's not the full title, but basically it's just a war with dragons. How super cool. And the aesthetic, everything was just on point with Heaven's Ward. It was fantastic. Then Stormblood released in June 2017. Mm-hmm. Stormblood wasn't my favorite. And honestly, I think that had everything to do with the fact that I just played an entire expansion devoted to fighting dragons and a bunch of dragon lore. And then you sent me into some political riffraff with people. How you got to do that to me?
Yeah, Heaven's Ward was so good to us personally because of our tastes. Tyler with the dragons and me with dragoons. That anything that came after it just wasn't going to really scratch that itch that we had.
No, and
we even got samurai, which is I love that stuff. I love the samurai thing, and then even the mechanical side of that job just didn't even do it for me, which was super unfortunate. So really they missed everything for me personally. Just none of it really quenched my thirst how I wanted it to. And Stormblood isn't bad.
And I think you're right. It's entirely our tastes. Yeah, exactly. Stormblood's not bad. It's just that when you make a game that caters so heavily to our tastes and then to really change it up, us personally. It was just kind of a bummer. But Stormblood was great. They introduced Xenos, who's a fantastic, crazy villain. And if I'm remembering correctly, while I didn't love Stormblood story-wise, I think Summoner was like peak Summoner for me for 14 was during Stormblood. Like, I loved it.
Well, I think that's when you got Bahamut, right?
Yeah, but like it played the right way and all of that, because as we move into Shadowbringers, which came out 2019 of July, or July of 2019 rather, I played Summoner and I loved it, but like Summoner specifically in 5.0, there were things I didn't love about it. Mostly that to do the job well, the rotation was like 2 minutes long, and if you screwed up or died or anything, like it was just hyper punishing in a way that was sometimes not fun.
Just get good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer to everything, right? Get good. But more importantly, Shadowbringers, again, we go back and forth on what our favorite is, but if you look at the community, Shadowbringers is by far the most loved story, and Shadowbringers is fantastic. It is, to me, honestly, one of the best Final Fantasy stories ever told. It is phenomenal. It does some very cool horror things that I don't want to spoil.
And that I didn't really expect out of a Final Fantasy game. Like,
yeah.
Final Fantasy doesn't really stray away from horror, really, but it doesn't exactly normally kind of like
embrace it,
dive into it and embrace it. And there was just some really good scenes that made the horror fan in us happy.
And what's interesting is you typically, you think horror and you get like, one of the big things Final Fantasy has done with 14 and is kind of tropey within Final Fantasy as well, is just like the light and the dark, which that's a theme that's in a lot of media, not just Final Fantasy. But you've got like Zodiark and Hydaelyn, and that's a big thing. Like, you are the warrior of light for, of all things in 14. But Shadowbringers presents this story where it's like, what if the scales were tipped too hard? There's no balance, and you defeat the darkness so much that light wins. And it's like, oh, light is not tight. Light bathes over everything and turns people into like light monsters. And it's not about the light winning, it's about balance. And then you have these sin eaters born from the light, and it corrupts, and like it takes that trope and kind of turns it on its head. And it's like, oh, damn.
It's very refreshing. Like, I love seeing tropes getting turned.
And they still pull off horror with light. Oh,
I know.
So
yeah,
good.
I know, right? Like, you guys, you gotta play it. Come play on Siren. That's the name of the server.
Yes, we are on Siren. Play with us.
I have a mansion and a free company that everybody is welcome to join. And our free company is dedicated to helping people learn the game.
Yep, it's a fantastic place. And so now we have Endwalker coming out. And Endwalker comes out, like I said, November 2021, and it's bringing back the same beloved writer from Shadowbringers. It's not the conclusion of Final Fantasy XIV itself, but the story Final Fantasy XIV has been telling since 2.0 is really about Hydaelyn, the Mother Crystal of Light, versus Zodiark, which is like the big baddie of the dark. And that story, that arc, is going to be coming to a conclusion with Endwalker. And we don't really know where 14 is going to go after this, but this is like the big end of an era within Final Fantasy 14, so it's a big deal. There's a lot of hype associated with it.
This is pretty huge. This is really big within this community.
Yeah. And while the story is coming to an end and it kind of feels like an end of an era, they're still to this day adding things in that players want. And not just things that are players want, but they're adding in things that are like culturally like a phenomenon. Like they're adding in, I forget what the hell it's called, but they're the Island Sanctuary, which they haven't showed a bunch yet, but it literally looks like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, but within Final Fantasy XIV. And like Animal Crossing blew up over the last like year plus with the pandemic and stuff like that. And they're adding in a mechanic like that within 14. You can just go farm and take care of your animals and do these things. You don't have to go out and be like this gigantic warrior saving the world. You can just go farm and take care of animals. It's tight.
So with one of the interviews with the devs, they actually said that the idea for the Island Sanctuary came about because the fans kept saying, hey, I want a way to hang out with all of these minions I've collected. And if you haven't played the game, what a minion is it's just basically like a small mini little pet, quote unquote, That just sort of follows you around and maybe has a couple animations. It's not in battle or anything. It's just, like a
Cool little aesthetic thing.
yeah, like a little aesthetic thing, like it's fashion. Well, anyways, they just follow you around. But a lot of people were saying, hey, I want a way to just go hang out with them, like have them all out. So thus has been born Island Sanctuary, where there's actually a gardening mechanic within the game where you grow crops and they're very useful and you sell them for gil and stuff. Well, anyways, you go there and do your gardening and all your minions are running around. You can just hang out with them and stuff. And like this literally came about because all the fans were asking for this. They didn't have to add this in. This is just like that extra icing on top of the already super amazing cake we have.
Yeah, and Final Fantasy XIV is the most Final Fantasy of any Final Fantasy. Like, they were just like all of these things. And if we sat here and made a list, again, it would take like its own episode. But it's like with Shadowbringers, you can go fight Ruby, Emerald, and Diamond Weapon from 7. And
Eden's in it from 8.
yeah, and that's in Shadowbringers. And I think in Stormblood, or was it Shadowbringers? I don't know, but you fight Kefka at one point.
Oh yeah, Kefka from 6. There's the
Warring
Triad.
in Heaven's Ward. You have a Chocobo minion that you can name and give it like a mount, but it also comes out and battles with you. You can change the colors and give it armor. There's Chocobo breeding and racing. There's the gold saucer from 7, but it's massive. It's like the Manderville saucer, but like
the entire gold saucer.
Ton of different mini games. Triple Triad is from
Triple
8.
Triad. There's Mahjong. There's a literal lottery to win that currency there, the MGP currency.
Yeah, it's just like...
and it's so much.
There is something for everyone in Final Fantasy XIV. It is like a giant theme park of everything Final Fantasy. They recently added in the Lunar Whale as a mount from 4. I think Lunar Whale's from 4, right?
Yeah, dude, it's so dope.
Okay. There's so many things.
Play 4.
And I'm getting there. We'll get there. But I personally have not been playing 14. I have not played 14 in any capacity since Shadowbringers first released. I played 5.0, beat the main story, and was done. With real life, quote unquote, and having a child that's 5, and just so much going on, Final Fantasy 14 is still an MMO. And there's still that you've got dailies, you've got weeklies, and of course you can always choose to not do them. But the type of player I was coming out of World of Warcraft and doing hardcore raiding and stuff, I'm a min-maxer. I love number crunching. I'm like, oh, I need to get my dailies done. I need to get my weeklies done so I can cap my currency to buy the newest gear so I can be in the best. And even though I wasn't actually doing any of hardcore raiding in 14, that was my mentality. And so I haven't played. I am going to be coming back to the game in the next couple of months to get caught up and then play Endwalker because I need the conclusion to that story. And I'll be reevaluating how I play 14 to work within my life and the way I play video games now. But 14 has something for everybody. If you're on the fence, if it sounds interesting, give it a try. Free trial, 0 to 60. Aroma Born, Heaven's Ward. There's no reason not to.
Do it.
But it's such a phenomenal game, and there's so many hours that can be sunk into it. But, you can turn it off. You can not pay the subscription, and, when you get what you want out of it, you can be done, which is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of players who are like that, where they'll just come back every 3 months for the new content, the new story patch.
Yep.
They'll just come back, play the story, and then leave again. And like, that's totally fine. Like, they've made the game to where you can do that, or you can just pick it up and drop it and come in, come out. If you want to be super hardcore and dedicated, there's tons and tons of systems for that. Or if you just want to be super, super casual and just play at your own pace, there's systems for that. They're even implementing a system to where you don't even have to play with anybody else, to where you can just have AI controlled NPCs running dungeons with you.
Yep. The trust system, which I'm honestly surprised they didn't add it in earlier, but like they keep expanding with it, and the trust system is going to be good. They're adding in Estinian now as a character. That's going to be super tight.
He's so cool.
But yeah, 14 is phenomenal. I am very excited to play it. I'm very excited for my kiddo to be old enough to play it with us, because my partner, she plays it as well. It's such a fantastic game. I can't recommend it enough if you're at all interested in MMOs like that. But it is a time sink, be in control of your time. But if you don't have those restraints, play till your heart's content. There's so many hours to be put into 14. I'm excited to come back to it.
Yeah, like, to put it in perspective, I started playing during the beta of 2.0, which was probably mid 2013, and I have almost 7,000 hours in the game. And I have been playing casually, if you want to call that casual, but I'm not a hardcore in-game raider. I did do a couple gear climbs, but then I also basically skipped all of Stormbringer's Stormblood. Stormbringers.
I'm just gonna mash them together. It'll be fine.
Dude, Stormbringers, that's Ramu. Stormblood, I basically skipped that whole expansion. I still have so many hours in there, and there's just so much still that I can do. I could go dedicate 12 hours a day, until Endwalker comes out, and I still wouldn't have caught up just because there's so many different things to do, for everybody. There's just so you can go buy a house and then go find thousands of decorations
and just decorate the house
and just decorate your house. There's whole subreddits and communities dedicated to decorating houses in this game, or there's collecting gear
or glamours and just making your character look gorgeous and fancy.
There's literally a system in the game called the Fashion Report where you have to make your character wear certain outfits and you get a higher score. It's just crazy how much different things there are in this game.
Yeah. For the uninitiated or people not familiar with it, it's probably just wow, this is a lot. But if you go into the game for the first time, focus on a couple of key things and then slowly branch out, because it can be overwhelming. There is a ton to do, but don't get sidetracked. You will never finish anything if you just dive into everything the game has to offer at once.
Or just play on Siren and come join my free company and we will help you. I'm not super active, but the guy that's in charge of my free company is super active, and he loves helping people. I got him into the game about a year ago, and that dude's climbing up to 3,000 hours played already.
Yeah, that dude's crazy. He's great.
Something like that. It's absolutely insane, but he loves teaching people.
And while that was a very, very kind of brief summarization of Final Fantasy XIV, again, this is a game that has so much to offer that if we really wanted to dive into it with either our experiences or what the game has to offer, we would be here for many, many episodes. And this will not be the last time we talk about 14. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more once we get caught up for Endwalker. And then once Endwalker is out, that we'll be reporting back in. But for now, we are going to be finishing up this episode. We want to, take a little moment to talk about a couple of things. One, we got a couple of reviews in. We had a review in from Scotland that I had to hunt a way down to see because of the region lock on Apple Podcasts. And then we got a couple Apple Podcast reviews. We want to take the time to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you left a review or a rating, they are invaluable to search algorithms, that sort of thing. We have
and to our egos.
Yes, and our egos, most importantly, right?
Please stroke my ego. I need it, please.
And we've got a website that is going to be up here in the not too distant future. It's essentially going to be a beautiful landing page that we can link to and get up on Google and have links to all of our different things that will grow as we grow. But if you're enjoying the podcast, rate us, review us. It's very helpful. But if you have already, and if you're interacting with us on social media, commenting, sharing, we appreciate you. It means the world to us. And
so much.
Keep doing it. We love talking with you. Tell us what you love about 14 and what you don't love, or, come over to Siren and hit us up. Once we're back up and active, we'll share some character names. You can come say hi.
Yeah, and even, I'm just going to go out here on a limb without previously discussing this with Tyler at all.
Oh, boy.
But we'll go ahead and throw, if you want to interact with us and you're like, I hate Twitter, I'll just drop my Discord invite. This is my Discord. This is not a Magus Brothers Discord. There's, a couple people in there, and we talk a lot of 14 and Final Fantasy and stuff. And, it's more geared towards my personal, YouTube and streaming and all that. But everybody is welcome. I will talk to you all day about different Final Fantasies. Tyler is in this Discord. He will talk to you about them. So there's another source of information if you're just like, I don't want to go on Twitter, which I don't blame you. Twitter is a scary place.
It can be, for sure. Any social media can be scary.
Oh, God. The hardest part about doing this, social media.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. But for now, thank you for listening, and join us next time where we have no idea what we're going to be discussing yet. It'll be a surprise.
Actually, it's probably going to be about Final Fantasy.
Damn it.
Bye.
Bye.
on the stage on my own. Whenever said my words, wishing that would be heard, I saw you smiling at me. Was it real or just my fantasy? You'd always be there in the corner of this time.